Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosdin, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm Mischievous Mark Chinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, but I don't think the annuals count.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for a special episode announcing Season 6 of the Amazing Spider Talk. Haven't we announced this before? No, this is the official announcement. Yes, it's Season 6 of the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe.
Yes, Dan, if you all want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app.
This podcast exists solely because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, including those of Season 6, exclusive artwork, and help keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon.
Every episode of the season features artwork by comic artist Nick Cagnetti and is available to our Patreon members unlettered and in stunning high resolution.
In this season of the Amazing Spider Talk, we're going back to the mid-'80s, just like Back to the Future, except they started in the mid-'80s, but this time we're going back to the mid-'80s when the Amazing Spider-Man title was handed over to one of the most legendary creative pairings in comics. Yes, these two were just starting their creative partnership. It's Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz. It was a time of immense change in the comics industry, but together, Tom and Ron returned Spider-Man to its Ditko-inspired roots to create one of the most beloved runs on this title.
Yeah, Dan, it might have seemed like just yesterday that we were talking about Season 5 and the Roger Stern run. You know, just yesterday if we were in that, like, time warp that MJ and Paul are in right now. Am I right? Oh! Holla! Anyway, thank you all for your patience. Of course, you know, we wrapped up Season 5 about a year ago at this point, but in the interim, Dan had a child. Spider-Man turned 60. So, you know, Season 6 had a little bit of a delay. We do want to let you know if you are a Patreon member, we're already 3 episodes deep on Season 6. So, incentive to get onto that Patreon. But now this is the official start of the season in our regular feed, if you will. And you know, I'm sure Patreon will keep getting some sneak peeks of some of the other stuff that's coming down the pipeline. Speaking of which, Dan, what are some of the things? Well, first of all, what should we be reading for this season, Dan?
Yeah, of course. So if you want to read along with us through the season and be caught up on all the books that we're going to be talking about, you know, like I said, we're going back to the mid-'80s, and Mark and I have cultivated a number of topics that we think will, work as kind of an exhaustive, reading summary of what we're going to be talking about, and we're covering a bunch of different stuff. So here's what I'm recommending that you read. And all of these will be listed in the show notes of this episode, so you can look there. But we're going to be talking about Amazing Spider-Man 252 to 289, which is typically considered the culmination of the Ron Frenz, Tom DeFalco run. Yes, there are other writers and artists and people that weave in and out of that run, but if you read 252 to 289, that's the kind of main scope of Amazing Spider-Man. We're also going to be talking about Spectacular Spider-Man during this run, specifically issues 90 to 127. This covers, an introduction of a bunch of new villains. A lot of the Black Cat romance kind of takes place in these issues and the fallout of that romance. You get some cool Kingpin stories, and Spectacular kind of ages up a bit in this run and becomes kind of a bit of a counter to Amazing Spider-Man with some dark issues here and there. You kind of get the first appearances of Peter David on the title, so some exciting books in Spectacular Spider-Man. We're also covering Marvel Team Up just a little bit, issues 141 to 150, a few cool Team Up titles in there. And we're talking about Web of Spider-Man. This is the introduction of this title, issues number 1 to 30. Again, a bit of a darker book, kind of covers the symbiote stuff and the early, advent of the Web of title. We're going to be taking a detour briefly into the Spider-Ham run, the original run of Spider-Ham issues number 1 to 17. And Mark, I actually have not read this thing in its entirety, so I'm excited to read it and talk about it now that the character has kind of taken on a life of its own. So we're talking about Spider-Ham numbers 1 to 17. And then a departure for our show, we're talking about some Avengers comics in here. There's some great Spider-Man team-ups in the Avengers with Roger Stern at the helm. So if you thought, are they going to cover all of Roger Stern's Spider-Man? Yes, we are. So check out Avengers issues 236 and 237, and also storyline 314 to 318 over in the Avengers. Some fun stories of Spider-Man both trying to join the Avengers and actually joining the Avengers for an adventure. So some pretty fun stuff. So, Mark, why don't we go one by one and run through our proposed episodes of this run? I say proposed because, things can always go haywire. We don't like to announce any guests that we haven't already booked. So we'll just kind of talk about the topics loosely and in the order that we plan on going through them. But again, all of this is subject to change, but consider this a hype up, get you excited for what's coming down the pike. So we can confirm, though, the first 3 of these are recorded and done and in the Patreon, so they exist. So, Mark, what did we do first that people can look forward to?
Well, our opening episode was kind of, as we like to kick off these seasons, Dan, is with just an overview of the DeFalco Friends run, some of the themes and things people should be looking for in this block of issues.
Yeah, it was a really fun conversation, and we kind of focused on how we really feel that Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz brought this book back to the Ditko era and really kind of continued that legacy, perhaps for the last time, before the book would be completely overhauled, and that'll be season 7. But the kind of modern era of Spider-Man came in, and we kind of wanted to celebrate what Tom and Ron did with that episode. What was next, Mark?
Well, then we had the legendary ones themselves, Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz, on for actually the first time we've had them both on at the same time for a conversation to talk not so much about specifics of this issue or that issue, but about their partnership and why it has been such a successful partnership, not only just for Spider-Man, but they've worked together on Thor and Spider-Girl and plenty of other titles over the years. So that we talked about that symbiosis, if you will, between those two creators.
Yeah, and I will mention, we're not going to be replaying old interviews that we've done with them, but we've had so many interviews with Tom and Ron over the years, specifically starting all the way back in Superior Spider Talk 10 and 14, where we had our initial interviews with them. But I know Tom has come back on, and I talked to him about his time as editor-in-chief, and I know we've had Ron on probably at least a half dozen times over the years. So, we've got this great interview with them about their partnership. But if you want to hear direct interviews with them about the run, we've got a ton of those already in the feed. So we'll kind of be expanding on that, and we'll often reference our old interviews with them. So, you can go back to the Spider Talk back issues channel where a lot of those interviews exist. And even in the main Amazing Spider Talk feed, there are a ton of interviews with Ron and Tom on our show. Mark, we just recorded our 3rd episode, and it was a lot of fun. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, we had our special guests, Kevin and Will Hines from the Screw It, Let's Talk About Comics podcast. They were on our show in season 5 to talk about some of the Roger Stern run villains. Well, this time they were talking about the deck of card villains from you'll hear about it in this season. But some of those villains include the Rose, Puma, Silver Sable, Fire Lord, Manslaughter, Slide, the Sinister Syndicate as a team, the Spot, Sin Eater, Foreigner, and of course the symbiote itself as the villain.
Yeah, that was a really fun episode. Kevin and Will are hilarious, and I think they're going to become reoccurring guests each season as we break down all the new villains. I just love recording with them. So coming up next is actually a talk about the black suit itself, the introduction of Spider-Man's real first alternate costume, and the legacy that it's weaved, and just what the story was about during the Ron Frenz, Tom DeFalco era. We're gonna have a really fun, exciting conversation about that, and we're hoping to get a guest on for that show. But I'm not going to announce anything because I don't want to jinx it.
And then we're going to have a guest in the next episode, too, about Peter Parker and Mary Jane, right? Right, Dan? Who's that guest?
Yeah, for that episode, we're going to be talking, like you said, about Peter and Mary Jane's relationship and the marriage, a hot topic always. And we're going to be joined by Brad and Lisa Gullickson from the Comic Book Couples Counseling podcast. And that's going to be a lot of fun because on their podcast, they really like to break down relationships between comic book characters and their love language and all of that stuff. There's kind of like a psychological element to that. So I think they're going to be able to provide a lot of, insight into Peter and Mary Jane's relationship. And as readers of the Ron Frenz and Tom DeFalco era know, like this is really the time when the two kind of came back together. And we got a lot of the characterization that would go on to define Peter and Mary Jane's relationship as on and off again as it has been over the past several decades. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And hopefully, Mark, you and I won't stir up too much of a controversy with that episode. But it seems inevitable for whatever reason. So what's coming after that?
Then we're going to be talking about gang wars. I mean, look, there seems to be a gang war in almost every major run of this book. There is one specific gang war that kind of marked the end of sorts for the DeFalco Friends run, in part because I think they got fired by Jim Owsley, who was the editor at the time. So that's fun. So we'll talk a little bit about that controversy as well. And of course, we'll talk about Daredevil in a fat suit, because if there is one indelible image from this run of comic books, it is Daredevil in a fat suit. So.
Yeah, so the next episode, we're going to be talking about Web of Spider-Man. Beyond even just that title, we're going to talk about Jim Owsley's 3-book plan between Spectacular, Amazing, and Web of. There was this real idea about splitting up the Spider-Man titles and giving them their own unique identities, whether or not that ever came to fruition. So we're going to talk about, what is the identity and legacy of Web of Spider-Man and what was it intended to be? So that'll be for the first 30 issues of Web of Spider-Man, which have kind of their own identity of sorts, even if it's just the Charles Vest covers. But, it should be a fun conversation, if you like to, spill the tea on the Jim Owsley drama and all that stuff. So Web of Spider-Man is coming up next. All right, Mark, what's after that?
Well, as you alluded to earlier in the reading list, Dan, we're going to have an episode dedicated to the beginnings and the origins of Spider-Ham. And Dan, like you, I have not actually really read those issues in full. So that is going to be a fascinating episode to record. Those comics are collector's items now, which is just so amazing to me because, I still remember seeing them. Were they the Star Comics at the time or the other imprint of Marvel? So they were joke comics. And, of course, they were, Spider-Ham was created by the legendary Tom DeFalco. But now here we are, Spider-Ham, the supernova character from the Into the Spider-Verse movies and on our show.
Didn't get quite the bump I expected him to get post that movie. I thought we would be neck deep in Spider-Ham comics again. But I guess not.
Well, maybe John Mulaney's personal problems derailed some.
That's true. Well, hey, next up, we're talking about Roger Stern again. We didn't get enough of him in season 5. We're talking about Roger Stern, Spider-Man as an Avenger. I'm sure Mark and I will have a discussion again about whether or not Spider-Man is fitting on an Avengers team. You go all the way back to annual number 3, where Spider-Man, is potentially trying out for the team. But here, he kind of goes on his first adventures with the Avengers. And, it's written by Roger Stern. So, you really can't ignore it. This to me feels like just a kind of addition to his Spider-Man run in a way. And he writes Spider-Man very affectionately in those pages. So if you haven't, you're someone that only reads Spider-Man comics and you haven't read those Avengers issues, might be something to go and check out to join us for that episode. Mark, tell us what's coming up next.
Well, after that, we're going to be talking about the death of Jean DeWolf. Now, this is, okay, look, like this is considered one of the most famous and classic Spider-Man stories of all time. I even dedicated an entire chapter to it in my book, 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. But, dirty little secret, Dan and I have talked about this, I think, openly over the years. Neither of us is really a huge fan of this arc. So, but we're not going to be talking about why we dislike it. That's not what this is going to be. That's not what our show is about. It's going to be more about like the impacts of this arc, and frankly, kind of the dark elements of this storyline, which I think we both are in agreement are heavily influenced by Frank Miller, who was basically pushing comics into the darker sphere during this time with his Daredevil and then his Batman. This is kind of like Spider-Man as Frank Miller's Daredevil has always been kind of my read on it. So we're gonna talk about it through that lens and through its impacts and and just on the industry overall. And I think that's going to probably be one of our better discussions, Dan. I don't want to hype it up too much, but like I always kind of like when we don't always buck with the conventional wisdom about a Spider-Man comic. So.
Yeah, well, it'll be really interesting because we're inviting Frank Miller on for that episode, and.
I almost just spit my beer out. Yeah, Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. Let's just have them both on.
Perfect,
let's go for it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Shoot for the moon. There's no way they're going to say no to us about that. No.
And why don't we get Alan Moore too while we're at it, Dan?
Yeah, Perfect. I'm sure he'd have a lot to say on this.
Yes.
No, I'm looking forward to that episode. Part of this, I'm really eager just to kind of start reading other Marvel titles that came out simultaneously just to see truly where Spider-Man fit in at the time. So I think it's going to be a great discussion, about a story that like we're not super hot on, but can still see the merits of. Now, like most of our seasons, that's the last planned episode, but we are going to have a few surprises up our sleeves that we aren't ready to announce just yet. But we do have a list of bonus episodes that we're going to go after. They might not be as ambitious as Frank Miller, but I think we got some really fun surprises coming. So, you can bank on those episodes that we just mentioned, but there's some other stuff that's cooking, and Mark and I will be eager to announce those once they slip into your feed. So make sure you're always staying subscribed to Amazing Spider Talk as we plow forward. But mostly we're just excited to kick off Season 6 officially, get it into your ear holes, and keep moving forward with our retrospectives. This is some of the most fun stuff we do on the show, and Mark and I know are eager to talk about a run that I think is very beloved amongst our listenership.
Absolutely, Dan. And of course, as you alluded to earlier, these are our planned episodes. It may not come out in the exact order we listed here, but we will be supplying you with some steady, delicious content here. So, on that note, Dan, just to leave you all wanting some more, it's that time, which means time for all good things to come to an end, even these little short hype episodes. So we want to first thank you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
As I said at the top, this podcast exists because of our listener support on the Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including the reviews we do of Amazing Spider-Man the same week that the comics release, Season 6 episodes, like we've said, up through Episode 3 already. We've got exclusive artwork and a ton of other bonuses. So thank you to everyone who already supports us in the work that we do. Plus, we want to say a special thank you to everybody who signed up this week. And that means a thank you to Simon Birch. So thank you to Simon Birch for joining our Patreon this week.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. And also to download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like the legendary Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz separately, as well as Jan DeMatteis, Mark Bagley, and many, many more. Subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
So, Mark, until we actually start Season 6 of this show, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.